The high desert wind carried dust across the tarmac as Captain Vera Koskinen stepped off the transport vehicle at Fort Bridger Advanced Marksmanship Training Facility. The morning sun blazed overhead, turning the distant mountains into shimmering silhouettes against a cloudless sky. She carried a standard-issue tablet and a weathered clipboard, her uniform crisp despite the 6-hour journey from command headquarters. Around her, the facility sprawled across 1,500 acres of carefully maintained ranges, each one designed to push the limits of modern precision shooting. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen military training facilities in your area or know someone who served as a marksman. The sound of gunfire echoed from the western ranges, sharp cracks punctuating the desert silence. Vera walked toward the main operations building, her boots crunching on gravel. Through the heat shimmer, she could see clusters of soldiers gathered around firing positions, their voices carrying across the open ground with that particular brand of competitive bragging that dominated any elite training facility. A staff sergeant emerged from the operations building, clipboard in hand, barely glancing at her as he hurried past. "Need you to sign for equipment deliveries at Loading Dock 3. He called over his shoulder, apparently assuming she was logistics personnel. Vera said nothing, simply adjusting her grip on her own clipboard and continuing toward the observation tower that overlooked the primary ranges. Inside the operations building, the air conditioning hit like a wall of ice. Vera paused, letting her eyes adjust to the dimmer interior. The walls were covered with range records, photographs of distinguished marksmen, and detailed topographical maps of the surrounding terrain. A bulletin board near the entrance displayed the current training roster, competition standings, and upcoming qualification schedules. She studied it carefully, her eyes tracking each name, each score, each notation about performance and specialization. Down the hallway, voices drifted from the range control room. Male voices, confident and loud, discussing the morning's training results. Someone laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Vera moved closer, standing just outside the doorway, where she could observe without drawing attention. Inside, 5 men clustered around a computer display showing thermal imagery from the morning shoots. The tallest among them, a major with combat patches from 3 different deployments, gestured at the screen. 1,700 meters, clean grouping, he said with evident satisfaction. Best we have seen from the new intake in 6 months. The others murmured agreement, their body language speaking of easy camaraderie built on shared expertise and mutual respect. Vera recognized the dynamic immediately. This was a community of specialists, men who had earned their place through demonstrated skill and hard-won experience. They operated with the casual confidence of people who knew exactly how good they were, and more importantly, knew that everyone else knew it too. It was the kind of environment where reputation mattered, where every shot was measured not just against the target, but against the legacy of shooters who had come before. A captain near the window noticed her standing in the doorway. He straightened slightly, his expression shifting to polite curiosity mixed with faint confusion. "Can we help you, miss?" he asked, the slight emphasis on the last word suggesting he was uncertain of her rank or purpose. "Are you looking for personnel administration? That is Building 6 across the motor pool." Vera offered a slight smile. "I am here for the program evaluation," she replied evenly. "I will be observing training operations this week." Her voice carried no particular emphasis, no demand for recognition or respect. Just a simple statement of fact. The major turned from the computer screen, his eyes sweeping over her with a quick assessment of someone trained to catalog and categorize. "Program evaluation," he repeated, his tone suggesting he was searching his memory for some notification he might have missed. "No one mentioned we would have observers this week." He glanced at the others, who shrugged in collective ignorance. "What division sent you?" Before Vera could respond, another voice called from deeper in the building. "Hey, could someone help the new admin clerk find the supply office? She has been wandering around for 10 minutes. Laughter followed, easy and thoughtless. The major's expression shifted to understanding, though it was the wrong kind of understanding entirely. "Ah," he said, his voice taking on a tone of patient explanation. "You're probably looking for the administrative support offices. They handle program paperwork and documentation. This is range operations. We coordinate the actual shooting training." His manner was not unkind, just dismissive in the way of someone redirecting a lost individual to the proper department. Vera nodded slowly, her expression remaining neutral. "I understand," she said quietly. "Perhaps I could observe from here? I need to assess training methodologies and performance standards." The words were carefully chosen, professional, revealing nothing beyond their surface meaning. The captain by the window exchanged a glance with the major, and Vera caught the silent communication passing between them. The look said, "Someone's secretary got ambitious, thinks she can understand what we do here by watching for a few days." The major's responding expression was tolerant, the patience of an expert dealing with an enthusiastic amateur. "Sure," the major said finally. "You are welcome to observe. Just stay clear of the firing lines and follow all safety protocols." He turned back to his computer display, already dismissing her from his attention. "The morning advanced shoot starts in 20 minutes at range 7. We will be testing new rifle systems at extended distances. You will want eye and ear protection from the equipment cage." Vera thanked him quietly and moved to the observation window that overlooked range 7. Below, soldiers were setting up firing positions, adjusting spotting scopes, and checking equipment with the methodical precision of people who had performed these tasks thousands of times. The targets downrange were barely visible even with magnification, small dark squares against the pale desert backdrop. She watched in silence as the men in the control room continued their conversation, discussing ammunition loads and barrel harmonics and wind compensation formulas with the fluent ease of native speakers in a technical language. None of them looked at her again. To them, she had already been categorized and filed away. Well-meaning but ultimately irrelevant, someone who would watch for a few days, take some notes, and return to her desk job with a superficial report that would change nothing about how they operated. The wind outside gusted stronger, rattling the windows. On range 7, a soldier raised his hand to signal ready status. The major leaned forward, watching his display with focused intensity. "Here we go," he murmured. "Let us see if anyone can break 1800 today." Vera said nothing, her eyes tracking the movements below with an attention to detail that none of the men in the room would have recognized as significant, even if they had been watching her instead of the range. The observation deck provided a clear view of range 7, where Master Sergeant Dale Richter was conducting the advanced marksmanship session. Vera watched as he moved between firing positions, his movements economical and precise. He had the bearing of a man who had spent 20 years perfecting his craft, and the easy authority that came from knowing he was among the best at what he did. Through the reinforced glass, she could see him pause behind a young specialist who was struggling with his sight alignment. Richter leaned down, his mouth moving as he offered correction. Even from this distance, Vera could read the body language. Patient instruction mixed with the faint exasperation of an expert watching someone fumble with basics. The door to the observation deck opened behind her. Richter stepped through, slightly out of breath from climbing the stairs. He had apparently finished his range supervision and come up to check on the administrative visitor. His expression was professionally courteous, the look of someone fulfilling an obligation to be welcoming. "Ma'am," he said, moving to stand beside her at the window. "I am Master Sergeant Richter, Senior Marksmanship Instructor." The major mentioned we had an observer from headquarters. He extended his hand, and Vera shook it firmly. His grip was strong, testing slightly the unconscious habit of someone used to physical challenges. "Captain Koskinen," she replied simply. "Thank you for allowing me to observe your training program." Richter nodded, turning his attention to the range below. "We run a tight operation here," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Best long-range training facility in the Continental Forces. Our graduates consistently outperform shooters from every other program." He pointed toward a soldier adjusting a rifle scope. "That specialist there just qualified at 1,500 meters yesterday. Took him 8 weeks of intensive training, but he got there. Vera made a notation on her tablet, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Richter watched her for a moment, then cleared his throat. Have you had much experience with precision shooting yourself, ma'am? Just asking so I know how much technical detail to include when I explain what you are seeing. The question was polite, but Vera heard the assumption beneath it. He expected her to say no, or perhaps to claim she had fired a pistol at a basic qualification range once or twice. It was the same assumption she had encountered 100 times throughout her career, and she had long since stopped being offended by it. Some experience, she said neutrally, her eyes still on the range. Please do not adjust your explanations on my account. I am here to observe standard operations, not receive special briefings. Richter looked slightly relieved, as if she had confirmed his expectations. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. What we do here is pretty technical. Years of training to develop the skills you are watching. He gestured toward the range with obvious enthusiasm. Most people do not understand the mathematics involved. Ballistics, meteorology, even a bit of physics. It is not just point and shoot. I imagine not, Vera replied quietly. Below them, a shooter fired. The crack of the rifle carried, even through the reinforced glass. Seconds passed, and then a spotter called out a hit. Richter smiled with satisfaction. 1,700 meters, he said. That is Corporal Santos. Excellent natural talent, but he still has a lot to learn about wind compensation. His groupings spread too wide in crosswinds. Vera noted the distance and watched Santos reset for his next shot. She could see the slight overcorrection in his position, the way he was fighting the rifle instead of letting it settle naturally. His breathing pattern was irregular, and he was gripping too tightly. All small things correctable with proper instruction, but they spoke to fundamental gaps in his training. Richter continued, warming to his subject, if you're going to be here all week, I could arrange some basic familiarization for you. We have beginner protocols for support personnel. Nothing fancy, just enough so you can understand what the shooters are doing. Help you write a more informed report. He smiled, clearly pleased with this generous offer. That is very kind, Vera said carefully. Perhaps if time permits. Richter nodded, already mentally filing her away as someone who would politely decline but appreciate the gesture. I will leave my schedule with the admin office. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get back to the line. We are testing the new rifle systems today, and I want to make sure everyone follows proper protocols. He paused at the door. Oh, and ma'am, stay clear of the actual firing positions. Safety regulations. I am sure you understand. Of course, Vera replied. After he left, she continued her observation. The morning progressed with a steady rhythm of shots and corrections. Richter moved between positions, offering guidance and criticism in equal measure. He was a competent instructor, she noted, but his methods relied heavily on repetition rather than fundamental understanding. He taught students to compensate for variables rather than truly comprehend them. Around mid-morning, the major from the control room appeared on the range floor. He conferred with Richter briefly, then both men looked up toward the observation deck. The major raised a hand in acknowledgement, and Vera returned the gesture. They spoke for another moment, and she could imagine the conversation. The helpful administrative observer, here to evaluate paperwork and procedures, well-meaning but ultimately out of her depth with the technical aspects. A lieutenant colonel she had not seen before joined them on the range. He was older than the others, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. He moved with the deliberate care of someone nursing old injuries, but his eyes were sharp as he surveyed the training in progress. Richter approached him with visible respect, and the three men stood in conversation while shooters continued their exercises around them. Vera watched the lieutenant colonel carefully. Unlike the others, he occasionally glanced toward the observation deck, his expression thoughtful. He said something to Richter, who shook his head and shrugged. The older officer nodded slowly, but his gaze returned to the window where Vera stood, as if something about her presence puzzled him in a way he could not quite articulate. On the firing line, Santos prepared for another shot at 1,700 meters. This time his position looked better, more settled. He controlled his breathing, let the rifle rest naturally, and squeezed the trigger with smooth patience. The shot cracked across the desert, and after the appropriate delay, the spotter called a clean hit. Richter clapped the corporal on the shoulder, clearly pleased. The lieutenant colonel watched with approval, but his eyes drifted back to the observation deck one more time before he turned to continue his inspection of the facility. Vera made careful notes on her tablet, documenting everything she observed. Not just the successful shots, but the small inefficiencies, the training gaps, the places where even these skilled instructors could improve their methods. She noted which soldiers showed genuine talent versus those who were simply well-drilled. She cataloged equipment where patterns and maintenance standards. And she did all of this in silence, maintaining the perfect camouflage of an administrative observer who appeared interested but not threatening, engaged but not challenging. Just another headquarters officer collecting data for a report that would probably never change anything. The wind picked up outside, sending dust devils spinning across the empty ranges. Vera glanced at the weather station display on the wall, automatically calculating wind speed and direction, humidity, and barometric pressure. Her mind ran through compensation formulas without conscious thought, the same way a musician might hear a melody and automatically know the key and tempo. Below, Richter was setting up for the next training evolution. The best shooters would attempt distances beyond 1,800 meters. This was where skill truly separated from luck, where only those with genuine mastery could consistently perform. Vera watched in silence, her expression revealing nothing, as the afternoon training session began. The afternoon sun had shifted angle, casting long shadows across Range 7 when Staff Sergeant Marcus Oleander arrived. Vera heard him before she saw him, his voice carrying up through the observation deck windows with that particular quality of someone accustomed to being heard and admired. He moved across the range floor with swagger, a rifle case slung over one shoulder, his uniform bearing the distinctive insignia of Special Operations Forces. Richter greeted him with obvious respect, and the two men clasped hands in the familiar way of old comrades. The other shooters on the line paused their activities, watching as Oleander set down his case and began extracting a custom rifle system. Even from the observation deck, Vera could see the weapon was expensive, personally modified, the kind of equipment that spoke to both expertise and ego. The major emerged from the control building to observe, and within minutes a small crowd had gathered. Oleander was clearly a known quantity here, someone whose visits were events rather than routine occurrences. He spoke animatedly, gesturing toward the distant targets, and the others listened with the attention usually reserved for celebrities or legends. Richter pointed toward targets at 1,200 meters, then gestured further out. Oleander shook his head with exaggerated modesty, saying something that made the group laugh. Then he pointed even further downrange, toward targets that Vera calculated were approximately 1,800 meters distant. The crowd reacted with enthusiasm, and someone clapped him on the back. Vera descended from the observation deck, moving quietly along the exterior walkway that led to the range floor. No one noticed her approach. All attention remained fixed on Oleander as he settled into his shooting position with practiced ease. His movements were fluid and confident, the performance of someone who had done this hundreds of times and knew he was being watched. The range fell silent. Even the soldiers at other firing positions stopped their exercises to observe. Oleander's spotter, another Special Forces operator who had arrived with him, lay beside him with a high-powered scope. They conferred briefly, their communication economical and professional. Then Oleander settled behind his rifle, his breathing slowing to the measured rhythm of a prepared shot. The crack of the rifle seemed sharper than the standard weapons being used for training. Vera watched the distant target through the range's observation screens. 3 seconds passed. 4. Then the spotter called out a confirmed hit, and the gathered crowd erupted in approval. Richter whistelt appreciatively. The major was grinning. Oleander rose from his position with theatrical flair, accepting congratulations and backslaps. That is how you reach out and touch someone at 1,800, he announced, his voice pitched to carry across the range. He worked the bolt on his rifle, ejecting the brass with a flourish. Who wants to see it again? The crowd encouraged him, and he settled back into position. This time, Vera moved closer, standing at the edge of the gathering, but still unnoticed. She watched his preparation, noting the small adjustments he made to his scope, the way he tested the wind with wetted fingers, the slight cant he introduced to his rifle position. All technically correct, she observed, but with an inefficiency in his shoulder placement that would limit his effectiveness at truly extreme ranges. The second shot cracked out. Another hit. The crowd's enthusiasm grew louder. Oleander stood again, this time making a show of checking his watch. 2 for 2 at 1,800 meters in under 90 seconds, he said. Not bad for a Tuesday afternoon. He looked around at the admiring faces, clearly enjoying the moment. That was when he noticed Vera standing at the periphery. His eyes swept over her with casual assessment, taking in her uniform and a tablet she carried. His expression shifted to something between amusement and performative gallantry. Well now, he said, his voice taking on a different tone, we have attracted a new audience member. He stepped toward her, rifle still cradled casually in his arms. Are you here to learn from the masters, ma'am? The gathered soldiers turned to look at her. Richter stepped forward, clearly intending to explain her presence, but Oleander waved him off. Let the lady speak for herself, Dale. He smiled at Vera, the expression friendly but unmistakably condescending. What brings you out to our little shooting gallery? Vera met his eyes calmly. I am observing training operations, she replied evenly. That was impressive shooting, Sergeant. Oleander's smile widened. 1,800 meters is nothing, he said with practiced modesty that was actually its opposite. On a good day, with the right conditions, I can push out to 2,000. He gestured toward his rifle. Of course, it helps to have the right equipment and about 10 years of trigger time. He paused, his tone shifting to something more tutorial. Have you ever fired a precision rifle, Captain? The use of her rank was deliberate but still dismissive, acknowledging her status while simultaneously implying it was administrative rather than operational. Vera considered her response carefully. I have some experience, she said simply. Some experience, Oleander repeated, glancing at his audience with a look that invited them to share his amusement. Well, that is a start. He turned back to her with exaggerated seriousness. You know, if you want to understand what we do here, you really need to feel it. The recoil, the trigger brake, the way the rifle settles. He gestured toward the firing line. I would be happy to walk you through a few shots. Nothing too ambitious. Maybe we start at 300 meters, work on the fundamentals. Several of the gathered soldiers grinned. The offer was generous in its way, but also patronizing. The implicit message was clear. You are out of your depth here, but we will be kind enough to give you a beginner's lesson, so you can check a box on your evaluation form. Vera maintained her neutral expression. That is very generous of you, Sergeant, but I am just here to observe today. Oleander shrugged, his smile never wavering. Open offer, ma'am. Anytime you want to try your hand, just say the word. He turned back to his rifle, running a cloth along the barrel with affectionate care. This girl here has taken me to distances most people only dream about. 28 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. He spoke the numbers with casual pride. She is my partner, my ticket to the record books. The major approached, clapping Oleander on the shoulder. Show them one more, Marcus. Let us see if he can make it 3 for 3. Oleander grinned and returned to his firing position. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting the best view. Vera remained at the edge, her position giving her a clear line of sight to both the shooter and the distant target. She watched his setup, his breathing, the minute tremor in his left hand that he compensated for with muscular tension rather than proper positioning. The third shot rang out. Another hit, though Vera noted it was slightly off-center compared to the first two. The gathering erupted again, and Oleander rose to accept their acclaim. He looked over at Vera, his expression inviting her to be impressed, to acknowledge his superiority. She nodded politely, making a notation on her tablet. Oleander watched her write, clearly curious what assessment she was recording. Around them, The other soldiers began to disperse back to their own training activities. The show apparently concluded. Richter moved to stand beside Oleander, and the two men spoke in lower tones. Vera caught fragments of their conversation. The words headquarters observer and program evaluation floated across the warm afternoon air. Oleander glanced at her again, his expression speculative now rather than simply dismissive. The wind gusted stronger, kicking up dust devils across the empty ranges beyond. Vera checked the wind speed display mounted near the firing line, her eyes tracking the shifting conditions with automatic calculation. The afternoon thermals were beginning to build, creating vertical instabilities that would make long-range shooting increasingly difficult. On the far side of the range, the lieutenant colonel she had noticed earlier emerged from the equipment building. He paused, watching Oleander pack up his custom rifle. Then his gaze shifted to Vera. For a long moment, he simply observed her, his weathered face thoughtful. Then he turned and walked toward the command building, his stride purposeful despite his apparent injuries. Vera returned to her documentation, recording details about training procedures and performance standards. Around her, the facility continued its rhythms, confident in its excellence, secure in its assumptions. And she remained perfectly camouflaged among them, just another observer from headquarters, impressed but ultimately irrelevant to the serious work of precision marksmanship. The administrative quarters assigned to visiting officers were Spartan but functional. Vera sat at the small desk, her tablet displaying detailed notes from the day's observations. The evening light filtered through the window, painting the distant mountains in shades of amber and gold. She typed methodically, recording not just what she had seen, but the patterns beneath the surface, the cultural dynamics that shape training outcomes. Her official assignment from Joint Special Operations Command was straightforward. Evaluate the effectiveness of Fort Bridger's advanced marksmanship program and recommend improvements or continuation of current protocols. What the evaluation request had not stated, but what Vera understood implicitly, was that someone at the highest levels had concerns. Graduation rates were excellent, qualification scores were impressive, but operational performance from recent graduates had been inconsistent. Something was not translating from the range to real-world conditions. After 3 days of observation, Vera was beginning to understand the disconnect. The program produced technically proficient shooters who could perform well under control conditions, but it did not adequately prepare them for the chaos of actual combat, the psychological pressure of taking a human life at extreme distance, or the improvisational thinking required when nothing went according to plan. The instructors taught mechanics brilliantly, but missed the art beneath the science. A knock at her door interrupted her analysis. She opened it to find Richter standing in the hallway, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I want to follow up on my earlier offer. Tomorrow morning, before the regular training schedule begins, I could give you some hands-on instruction. Nothing official, just a chance to experience what we teach here." His tone was earnest, genuinely trying to be helpful. Vera recognized the impulse. He wanted her evaluation to be favorable, and he believed the best way to ensure that was to give her personal experience with their methods. It was both strategic and kind in its way. "I appreciate the offer, Master Sergeant," Vera replied carefully, "but I do not want to disrupt your schedule or take time away from your regular students." Richter shook his head. "No disruption at all, ma'am. In fact, it might help your report if you can speak from personal experience about our teaching methods. Just basic marksmanship principles, maybe work up to 500 or 600 meters if you show aptitude." He smiled encouragingly. "I have taught plenty of support personnel over the years. You might surprise yourself." The assumption hung unspoken between them, that she would struggle with even basic concepts, that 600 meters would represent a significant achievement, that his patience and skill would be necessary to guide her through fundamentals. Vera saw no malice in the assumption, just the blind spot of someone who had spent so long in a male-dominated specialty that he could not conceive of alternatives to his worldview. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "I will let you know tomorrow morning." Richter nodded, satisfied with this response. It was still essentially a yes in his mind. Fair enough, ma'am. Offer stands whenever you are ready. He paused, then added, we do not get many observers who show real interest in understanding the technical side. Most just watch from the tower and write up their reports. The fact that you are willing to try it yourself, that shows character. After he left, Vera returned to her desk, but found concentration difficult. Memories pushed forward, unbidden but insistent. She remembered another range, another time, when she had been the one learning. 15 years ago, a green lieutenant fresh from basic officer training, assigned to a reconnaissance unit that did not know what to do with a female officer who insisted on field operations rather than staff positions. Her first platoon sergeant had been skeptical but fair. He had given her the same challenges he gave everyone else, with no adjustments for gender and no expectations of success. When she had outshot every man in the platoon at her first qualification, his skepticism had transformed into fierce mentorship. He had recognized something in her that she had barely understood herself, an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions, to account for variables that others struggled to conceptualize, to make shots that seemed impossible. That sergeant had pushed her toward specialized training, had written recommendations that opened doors, had championed her when others doubted. He had been killed 6 years ago in a training accident, and Vera still felt the loss like a physical weight. He had believed in merit over assumptions, in evidence over prejudice, in the radical idea that the best shooter should take the shot regardless of any other consideration. The military had changed since then, officially at least. Women served in combat roles now. Opportunities existed that had been closed before. But culture changed more slowly than policy, and places like Fort Bridger remained bastions of old assumptions. Not from malice, Vera understood, but from the comfortable inertia of tradition and the human tendency to see what they expected rather than what existed. She thought about Oleander's casual arrogance, Richter's well-meaning condescension, the major's automatic dismissal. They were not bad men. They were skilled professionals who had dedicated their lives to excellence in a demanding specialty. But their excellence had made them blind to possibilities outside their experience. They had constructed a world where they were the standard, the measure, the definition of competence. Vera stood and moved to the window. Below, the ranges were quiet in the gathering darkness. Security lights clicked on, creating pools of illumination across the vast facility. Somewhere out there, soldiers were cleaning weapons, reviewing performance data, preparing for tomorrow's training. All of them confident in their understanding of how the world worked, secure in their place within the hierarchy of skill. She had spent most of her operational career maintaining exactly this kind of anonymity. Her work required it. Deep reconnaissance missions, counterterrorism operations, situations where her targets never knew she existed until the moment they ceased to exist. She had learned to be invisible, to blend into backgrounds both literal and social, to let others underestimate her while she accomplished objectives they did not know were objectives. But invisibility came with costs. It meant watching less qualified men receive recognition for achievements she had enabled. It meant enduring assumptions and dismissals that would have been unthinkable if people knew her record. It meant carrying the weight of competence in silence, never correcting misconceptions, never claiming credit, never revealing the truth beneath the surface. The question she faced now was whether revealing that truth served any purpose. Her evaluation did not require her to demonstrate her own skills. She could complete her assessment, submit her report, and return to her regular duties without anyone at Fort Bridger ever knowing who she really was. That would be simpler, cleaner, less disruptive. But something about this place troubled her beyond the technical evaluation. The culture here was not just inefficient. It was potentially dangerous. It rewarded bravado over substance, confidence over competence, performance over genuine mastery. Soldiers trained here learned to shoot impressively on controlled ranges, but not to think adaptively under pressure. They learned to hit targets, but not to question their assumptions. And perhaps most troubling, they learned that women were spectators rather than participants, support personnel rather than operators, people to be protected or instructed, but never equals or superiors. That attitude might seem harmless on a training range, but Vera had seen how it played out in combat. Dismissing 50% of potential talent based on gender was not just unjust, it was tactically stupid. The knock at her door came again, different this time. Softer, more tentative. Vera opened it to find a young specialist standing nervously in the hallway. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "Lieutenant Colonel Brennan would like to speak with you, if you have a moment. He's in his office in Building 2. Vera nodded, grabbing her uniform jacket. The walk across the facility took only a few minutes. The evening air had cooled significantly, and stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Building 2 was the senior officer quarters and administrative hub, quieter than the operational buildings. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's office was exactly what she expected. Functional, organized, walls covered with commendations and photographs from a long career. He stood when she entered, and she noted again the careful way he moved, favoring his left side. Shrapnel wounds, she guessed probably from an IED. Career-ending injuries that had transitioned him from field operations to training command. "Captain Koskinen," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming. I hope I'm not keeping you from your evening." "Not at all, sir," Vera replied, settling into the offered chair. Brennan remained standing for a moment, studying her with an intensity that felt different from the casual assessments she had endured all day. This was the gaze of someone actually looking, not just seeing what he expected. He lowered himself into his own chair with careful control, the movement speaking to persistent pain managed through discipline. "I have been reviewing your credentials, Captain," he said without preamble. "Your file is remarkably sparse for someone assigned to evaluate our program. Basic officer course, some logistics training, current assignment listed as administrative operations at JSOC headquarters." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. Yet something does not quite fit. Vera maintained her neutral expression. "Sir, I am not sure I understand your concern." Brennan leaned back his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I have been in this business for 28 years, Captain. I have learned to notice things. The way you move, for instance. That is not the gait of someone who spends their days behind a desk. The way you observed training today. Your eyes tracked trajectories and calculated windage like someone reading familiar text. And when Sergeant Oleander was shooting, I saw you notice a shoulder placement issue before my own instructors did." The room felt suddenly smaller. Vera chose her words carefully. "I have some field experience, sir, before my current assignment." Brennan smiled slightly, but there was no humor in it. Some field experience. He reached for a folder on his desk, opening it to reveal a single sheet of paper with perhaps a dozen lines of text. "This is what JSOC sent when I requested background information on our observer. It tells me almost nothing, which in my experience usually means it is hiding everything." He closed the folder. "So let me ask you directly, Captain. Who are you really, and what is your actual purpose here?" The silence stretched between them. Vera weighed her options, calculating probabilities and consequences. Brennan was clearly perceptive enough that maintaining her cover might prove more disruptive than revealing the truth. But full disclosure was not an option either. "My assignment is exactly what was stated, sir," she said finally. "I am here to evaluate training effectiveness. The methods and conclusions of that evaluation are classified, which tells me the evaluation is operational rather than administrative," Brennan replied. "You're not here to assess paperwork or budget allocations. You are here because someone at command level has concerns about our combat performance outcomes." He leaned forward slightly. "What I cannot determine is whether you have the technical expertise to make those assessments, or if you are just collecting data for actual experts to analyze later." Vera met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, my qualifications are sufficient for my assigned task." Brennan studied her for a long moment, then reached for a different folder. "Let me share something with you, Captain. 3 months ago, 2 graduates from this facility were deployed to a high-value target interdiction in the Hindu Kush. Both were excellent shooters by our standards. Top scores in their training cohorts, strong performance under controlled conditions." He opened the folder, though Vera suspected he had memorized its contents. The mission required a 2,000-meter shot in mountainous terrain with variable winds. Both shooters missed their targets. Repeatedly, the mission was compromised, and we lost 3 operators in the extraction. The weight of those deaths hung in the air between them. Vera remained silent, letting him continue. That was not an isolated incident, Brennan said quietly. Our graduates are failing in the field at rates that do not match their training performance. Something in how we teach them is not translating to real-world application. So when JSOC sends an observer who moves like an operator and watches like a sniper, I want to know if that observer can actually help us fix the problem or if this is just another bureaucratic exercise. Vera considered her response carefully. The cultural issues she had identified were real, but pointing them out to Brennan would require revealing knowledge she theoretically should not possess. Yet his directness deserved something approaching honesty in return. Sir, she began slowly. The technical instruction here is excellent. Master Sergeant Richter and his team teach mechanics as well as anyone. But mechanics are not enough. Your students learn to shoot at known distances, in controlled conditions, with spotters providing data. They learn to replicate successful shots, not to solve novel problems. She paused, choosing her next words with care. In combat, nothing is controlled. Distances are estimated rather than measured. Winds are chaotic rather than steady. And most critically, the target is a human being who will die because of your actions. That psychological reality changes everything. Brennan nodded slowly. Go on. Your students also learn that confidence equals competence, Vera continued. That swagger and bravado indicate expertise. But the best shooters I have observed in my career were often quiet, almost invisible. They did not need to perform their skill because they were secure in possessing it. She thought of her own mentor, the gruff sergeant who had taught her that true mastery whispered while insecurity shouted. So you're saying our culture is the problem, Brennan said. Not our curriculum. They are inseparable, sir. Culture determines what skills are valued, and therefore what skills are developed. If the culture rewards performance over problem solving, students learn to perform rather than think. If the culture associates competence with masculine bravado, it excludes 50% of potential talent and teaches the remaining 50% to value the wrong attributes. Brennan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You speak like someone with operational experience, Captain. Actual trigger time, not just observation. Vera chose not to respond to that directly. My report will include specific recommendations for curriculum modifications and cultural adjustments. Whether command chooses to implement those recommendations is beyond my control. The lieutenant colonel watched her carefully, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. Captain, he said finally, I'm going to tell you something that stays in this room. I have my own suspicions about why our training is failing. I think we have become too comfortable, too certain of our methods. I think we need someone to challenge our assumptions, shake up our comfortable hierarchies. He leaned forward. Tomorrow, we are conducting extended range trials. New rifle systems, prototype ammunition, attempts to push our performance envelope beyond 2,000 meters. Every hotshot in the facility will be there, trying to set records. He paused meaningfully. I want you there as well. I plan to observe, sir. No, Brennan said quietly. I want you on the line. I want you to attempt the shots yourself. Let Richter give you his beginner instruction if that maintains your cover. But I want to see how you actually perform, not how you observe others performing. His eyes were sharp, calculating. Call it part of your evaluation methodology. How can you assess training effectiveness without experiencing the training yourself? It was a trap of sorts, Vera realized, but not a malicious one. Brennan suspected something about her background and wanted confirmation. He was offering her an opportunity to reveal herself in a controlled setting, or to maintain her cover by performing adequately but not exceptionally. The choice was hers. That is an interesting proposition, sir, she said carefully. It is a necessary one, Brennan replied. You have identified culture as the central problem. Culture is not changed by reports, Captain. It is changed by disruption, by undeniable demonstrations that challenge fundamental assumptions. He stood, signaling the end of their meeting. The trials begin at 0700. Master Sergeant Richter has already volunteered to provide you instruction. I am simply making his generous offer mandatory for your evaluation. Vera rose as well, recognizing the order beneath the suggestion. Understood, sir. I will be there. As she turned to leave, Brennan spoke again. Captain Koskinen, one more thing. In my experience, the quietest people in any room are often the most dangerous. I have learned not to underestimate silence. His expression was unreadable. I look forward to tomorrow's demonstration. The walk back to her quarters felt longer than it had earlier. The facility was quiet now. Most personnel settled for the evening. Vera's mind worked through implications and scenarios. Brennan had effectively forced her hand, requiring a demonstration that would either expose her capabilities or confirm her as inadequate. There was no middle ground that would satisfy his suspicions while maintaining her cover. She thought about the mission that had brought her here, the quiet concerns at command level about training failures. She thought about the soldiers who had died because their training had not prepared them for reality. She thought about the culture of comfortable certainty that pervaded this facility, the assumptions that limited potential and sometimes cost lives. And she thought about her mentor, that gruff sergeant who had believed in evidence over assumptions, who had taught her that sometimes disruption served a higher purpose than comfort. What would he counsel now? She knew the answer. He would tell her that hiding competence served no one, that protecting egos was less important than preparing soldiers, that truth revealed was always preferable to truth concealed when lives hung in the balance. The decision crystallized as she reached her quarters. Tomorrow would not be about maintaining cover or protecting assumptions. Tomorrow would be about demonstrating what was possible when competence was unshackled from prejudice, when skill was recognized regardless of who possessed it, when excellence was measured by evidence rather than expectation. Dawn arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of morning that precision shooters dreamed about. Vera stood outside her quarters at 0630, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of rose and gold. The air was still cool, the wind minimal, conditions nearly perfect for the extended range trials. She had slept poorly, her mind cycling through scenarios and consequences, but her body felt alert and ready. Years of operational conditioning had taught her to function regardless of sleep quality. The walk to Range 7 revealed unusual activity for this early hour. Multiple equipment trucks were positioned near the firing line, and a substantial crowd had already gathered. Word had apparently spread about the new rifle systems and the attempt to break facility records. Vera counted at least 30 personnel, far more than typical training sessions warranted. This was an event, a competition, an opportunity for the facility's best shooters to demonstrate their superiority. Richter spotted her approaching and waved enthusiastically. He stood near a row of rifles laid out on equipment tables, each weapon tagged with technical specifications. Captain Koskinen, he called out, "Glad you can make it. I have set aside some time before the official trials begin. We will start with fundamentals, get you comfortable with the equipment, then maybe work up to 800 or 900 meters if things go well." His tone was encouraging, the voice of a patient teacher preparing to guide a novice. Around him, several shooters were conducting pre-trial preparations, checking optics, and reviewing range data. Oleander was among them, his custom rifle already assembled and positioned. He glanced over at Vera and Richter, a slight smile playing at his lips. Starting from scratch, Dale, he called across the firing line. "Make sure she understands trigger discipline. We do not want any accidents out here." Several nearby shooters chuckled, the humor easy and casual. Not cruel, but certainly not respectful either. Richter shot Oleander a mildly reproving look, but did not contradict him. He turned his attention back to Vera. "Do not mind Marcus," he said quietly. "He gets competitive before big shoots. Now, let me show you the basics of this rifle system." He gestured toward a standard military precision rifle, not one of the prototype weapons being tested today. "We will start you on familiar equipment." Vera nodded. allowing him to guide her through explanations she could have recited from memory. She listened attentively as he described sight picture, breathing control, trigger squeeze, follow through. All fundamentals she had mastered 15 years ago, but she played the role of interested student, asking appropriate questions and nodding at his answers. The range operations officer arrived, a captain named Torres who moved with brisk efficiency. He carried a clipboard and began coordinating the trial schedule. The official testing would begin at 0800, he announced. Extended range targets were set at 1800, 2000, 2200, and 2400 meters. Each shooter would have 5 attempts at progressive distances. Best performances would be recorded for facility archives. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan appeared shortly after, accompanied by 2 officers Vera did not recognize. They wore headquarters insignia, likely sent to observe the new equipment trials. Brennan spotted Vera with Richter and offered a slight nod, his expression unreadable. She understood the message. Whatever happened next, he would be watching. "All right, Captain," Richter said, apparently satisfied with his preliminary instruction. "Let us get you into position and see how you do with a basic shot. We have targets at 300 meters marked for training use. Nothing fancy, just get a feel for the weapon." He helped her settle behind the rifle, adjusting her position with gentle corrections. "A little more weight on your support elbow," he suggested. "That is it. Now, when you're ready, nice slow squeeze." Vera settled into the position, her body remembering patterns practiced 10,000 times. She could feel the imperfections in Richter's suggested stance, the ways it would limit performance at extreme range, but for 300 meters, it was adequate. She controlled her breathing, let the rifle settle naturally, and squeezed the trigger with smooth precision. The shot cracked out. 3 seconds later, the spotter called a center mass hit. Richter beamed with the pride of the teacher whose student had exceeded expectations. "Excellent, Captain. Really excellent for a first shot. Natural talent, clearly." He was already mentally congratulating himself on his teaching ability. "Let's try another. Same target. See if you can replicate it. 5 more shots, 5 more center mass hits." Richter's enthusiasm grew with each success. The gathered shooters were beginning to notice, their conversations pausing as they observed the administrative captain performing surprisingly well under basic instruction. Oleander had stopped his own preparations to watch, his expression shifting from amused condescension to mild curiosity. "You know what?" Richter said, confidence building in his voice. "I think we can move you out a bit further. Let us try 600 meters. That will really test your fundamentals." He was already thinking about how this would reflect well on his teaching methods, how he could use this success story in future training presentations. The 600-meter target was barely visible without magnification. Vera made a show of studying it through the scope, taking slightly longer than necessary to suggest uncertainty. Then she settled and fired. Clean hit. 4 more shots, for more hits, grouping tight enough to draw appreciative murmurs from the observing shooters. Now Richter was genuinely impressed. "Captain, that is exceptional shooting. Really, truly exceptional." Beginner's luck could not account for this consistency. He glanced toward Brennan, who was watching from the observation area with an expression of focused interest. "You know," he said, dropping his voice slightly, "if you want to try something more challenging, the trials do not officially start for another 20 minutes. We could attempt 900 meters, just to see what you are capable of." Vera appeared to consider this, playing the role of someone both flattered and uncertain. "If you think it is appropriate, Master Sergeant." The targets at 900 meters were steel plates, clearly visible but requiring genuine skill to hit consistently. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by word that the visiting captain was shooting remarkably well under Richter's instruction. Vera could feel their attention, their curiosity mixed with lingering assumption that this was probably as far as her ability would extend. She fired 5 rounds at 900 meters. 5 hits. The grouping was tight enough that Torres came over to examine the target display personally. He looked at Vera with new assessment in his eyes, the automatic recalculation of someone forced to revise their assumptions. Oleander approached the firing line, his casual confidence replaced by something more serious. "That is solid shooting, Captain," he said, and this time the condescension was gone from his voice. "Dale, you did not mention our observer had this kind of background. Where did you train, ma'am?" "Various places," Vera replied neutrally. "I have had good instructors." "Apparently so," Oleander said. He glanced at the targets, then back at her. "You know, the trials are about to begin officially. 1,800 meters to start. That is a significant jump from 900. He paused, his tone somewhere between challenge and genuine interest. "If you wanted to observe from the firing line rather than the tower, I am sure no one would object. Might give you better perspective for your evaluation." What he was really saying, Vera understood, was that he wanted to see if her performance would hold at distances where skill truly separated from luck. The invitation was both respectful and competitive, the response of someone whose ego was invested in remaining the facility's best shooter. Brennan had moved closer, near enough to hear the conversation. He met Vera's eyes briefly, and she read the question there. "How far are you willing to go? What are you willing to reveal?" The moment of decision had arrived sooner than she had planned. She could demur, claim that 900 meters was her limit, retreat to the observation tower, and maintain the comfortable illusions that surrounded her. Or she could step onto the firing line alongside the facility's elite shooters and demonstrate capabilities that would shatter every assumption they held. Vera thought about the soldiers who had died in the Hindu Kush, inadequately prepared by training that valued performance over genuine mastery. She thought about her mentor's voice, urging her toward truth over comfort. She thought about the fundamental purpose of her evaluation, which was not to document existing methods, but to catalyze necessary change. "I would like to observe from the firing line," she said quietly, "if that would not disrupt the trials." "Not at all," Torres replied, his professional demeanor masking his evident curiosity. "We will add you to the roster." He made a notation on his clipboard. "Captain Koskinen, observing and participating for evaluation purposes." He looked up at her. "Standard protocol, 5 shots at each distance, progressive elimination as ranges extend. Best cumulative score wins facility recognition." "Understood," Vera said. Around her, the gathered shooters exchanged glances, their expressions mixed. Some showed encouragement, pleased to see the visiting captain take on a genuine challenge. Others revealed skepticism, certain that 900 meters had been her ceiling and that embarrassment awaited at serious distances. And a few, including Brennan and perhaps Oleander, watched with the focused intensity of people who suspected they were about to witness something significant. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last traces of cool air. Range 7 fell into organized preparation as the trials officially commenced. Vera checked the assigned rifle, a standard military precision system, and settled into the mental space she had occupied countless times in her career. The space where noise faded, where ego dissolved, where only the shot mattered. The demonstration was about to begin, though no one except possibly Brennan understood what was truly about to be demonstrated. The trials began with mechanical precision. Torres called the first shooter to the line, a staff sergeant from the 3rd Training Battalion who had consistently scored in the top percentiles throughout his time at the facility. The 1,800-meter target shimmered in the morning heat, a dark square against pale earth barely visible even through high-magnification optics. The staff sergeant settled into position with practiced efficiency. His spotter fed him data in quiet tones. Wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, all the variables that would affect the bullet's 3-second flight to target. The first shot cracked out, and after the appropriate delay, the spotter confirmed a hit. 4 more shots followed, 3 hits and 2 misses. Respectable performance that drew polite applause from the gathered observers. 5 more shooters attempted the 1,800-meter distance. Results varied from 2 hits to 4, with one shooter missing all 5 attempts and withdrawing from the competition with visible frustration. Oleander was scheduled 7th, and he approached the line with his characteristic confidence. His custom rifle gleamed in the sunlight, every surface meticulously maintained. He fired 5 shots with smooth consistency, his movements economical and professional. For hits, one near miss that drew a slight grimace. Still, excellent shooting by any standard, placing him near the top of current performers. He rose from position and glanced toward where Vera waited, his expression expectant. The unspoken challenge was clear. Match that. Richter appeared at Vera's side as Torres called her name. Now, Captain, he said quietly, no pressure here. 1,800 meters is extremely difficult. Even 2 hits would be impressive, given your limited experience. Just apply the fundamentals we practiced. He clearly expected her to struggle, perhaps withdraw entirely, but he wanted to be encouraging regardless of outcome. Vera moved to the firing line, aware of the heightened attention focused on her. The visiting administrative captain, who had surprised everyone at shorter ranges, was about to face the distance where skill truly mattered. Conversations around the range had quieted, everyone curious to see how this unexpected story would develop. She settled behind the assigned rifle, feeling its weight and balance. Standard military equipment, well-maintained but nothing special. No custom modifications, no personalized adjustments, just a functional tool designed for competent performance. Adequate for what she needed to demonstrate. The wind had picked up slightly, quartering from the northwest at approximately 8 miles per hour with occasional gusts to 12. Temperature was rising, creating vertical instabilities that would grow worse as the morning progressed. Humidity was low, air density favorable. Vera processed these variables automatically, her mind running calculations refined through years of experience. She did not request data from Spotter. That omission drew immediate notice from the experienced shooters watching. At 1,800 meters, every variable mattered, and foregoing professional wind readings suggested either ignorance or remarkable confidence. The observers were clearly betting on ignorance. Vera's first shot hit center mass. The impact was visible through the high magnification displays, a clean strike that left no doubt about placement. A murmur ran through the crowd, surprised but not yet convinced. Luck remained a plausible explanation. Her second shot hit within inches of the first. The murmurs grew louder. Coincidence was becoming less believable. Third shot, fourth shot, fifth shot. All hits. The grouping was tight enough that Torres had to verify the target display twice, certain the system must be malfunctioning. But the sensors were accurate, the data undeniable. 5 for 5 at 1,800 meters, shooting alone without spotter support, using standard equipment. Richter stood frozen, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning comprehension. That is, he began, then stopped, apparently unable to complete the thought. His assumptions about his successful teaching had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that he had taught nothing at all. Oleander's confidence had cracked visibly. He stared at the target display, then at Vera, his mind clearly working through impossible calculations. No one shot 5 for 5 at 1,800 meters. Elite snipers with years of experience and custom equipment might achieve 4 for 5 on an exceptional day. What he had just witnessed should not have been possible. Brennan watched from the observation area, his weathered face showing no surprise, only grim satisfaction. He had suspected, and now his suspicions were being confirmed in the most dramatic way possible. Torres cleared his throat, consulting his clipboard with the mechanical focus of someone clinging to procedure amid disruption. Moving to 2,000 meters, he announced. 8 shooters qualified to continue. He read names, including Oleander and Vera, though his voice wavered slightly on the latter. The 2,000-meter targets were barely visible dots even through magnification. At this distance, bullet drop exceeded 15 feet, and crosswinds could push rounds several feet off course. This was the range where confidence died and reality dominated, where only genuine masters achieved consistent success. The first 3 shooters managed 1 hit each from their 5 attempts. The 4th shooter achieved 2 hits and raised his arms in triumph, knowing he had performed beyond his training. Oleander approached the line with visible tension, his swagger replaced by intense focus. He understood the stakes now. This was no longer about setting records or impressing peers. This was about defending his reputation against an impossible challenge from an impossible source. His first shot missed. Overcorrected for wind, the round passing left of target. He adjusted his jaw tight and fired again. Hit. His third and fourth shots also connected, and his fifth missed by inches. 3 for 5, a strong performance that would normally guarantee continued competition at higher ranges. But nothing about this situation was normal anymore. Torres called Vera's name, and the range fell into silence, so complete that the wind itself seemed to pause. Every person present understood they were witnessing something significant, though most could not yet articulate exactly what. Vera approached the firing line with the same quiet efficiency she had maintained throughout. No theatrics, no visible tension, just professional focus on the task ahead. She settled behind the rifle, her breathing slow and measured. 2,000 meters, just over a mile. A distance that required not just mechanical skill, but deep understanding of ballistics, environmental science, and the complex interactions between countless variables. She fired without hesitation. First shot, clean hit. The impact registered on sensors before the sound of the shot had fully faded. Second shot, another hit. The crowd remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. This was no longer skeptical observation. This was witnessing expertise that exceeded their collective understanding. Third shot, fourth shot, fifth shot. 5 for 5 at 2,000 meters. Perfect score at a distance where perfection was theoretical rather than practical. The target display showed grouping so tight it suggested mechanical consistency rather than human performance. Someone in the crowd exhaled audibly, the sound breaking the spell. Conversations erupted, urgent and confused. Shooters who had spent years developing their skills were confronting performance that invalidated their understanding of what was possible. Equipment specialists were checking the rifle Vera had used, searching for modifications or advantages that would explain the inexplicable. Richter approached Torres, speaking in urgent tones. The range officer shook his head, gesturing toward the verified data. Whatever Richter was suggesting, questioning the accuracy of the sensors or the legitimacy of the results, Torres was having none of it. The data was clear and undeniable. Oleander stood alone near his equipment, staring at nothing. His expression had moved beyond shock into something approaching existential crisis. His identity was built on being the best shooter at this facility, possibly in the entire theater. That identity was crumbling in real time, replaced by the uncomfortable reality that someone he had dismissed as a beginner was operating at a level he could not begin to approach. One of the headquarters observers, a colonel whose name Vera did not know, had moved close to Brennan. They spoke intensely, the colonel gesturing toward her while Brennan responded with economical words and subtle gestures. Vera recognized the dynamic. Questions were being asked, explanations demanded, assumptions challenged at levels beyond this facility. Torres consulted his clipboard, though his hands were not entirely steady. 2,200 meters, he called out. 5 shooters qualified to continue. His voice carried across the range, and Vera noted that several names were not called. The competition was narrowing rapidly, unable to match performance that should not have existed. The morning sun climbed higher, and the conditions that had been nearly perfect at dawn were beginning to deteriorate. Rising temperatures created heat shimmer and vertical instabilities. Wind patterns grew more chaotic. Every variable was trending toward difficulty. Yet Vera knew the hardest demonstration was still ahead, because 2,200 meters was not the limit. The facility had targets placed at 2,400 meters, distances that existed more for aspiration than actual training. Distances where even the most elite shooters rarely achieved consistent hits. Distances where luck mattered as much as skill, and where most experts would counsel that attempting the shot was pointless. But Vera understood something that the others did not. The real test was not about distance. The real test was about shattering assumptions so completely that reconstruction became necessary. about demonstrating that excellence existed beyond their recognition, that competence could not be assessed by appearance or assumption, that their comfortable certainties about skill and gender and expertise were built on foundations of sand. She returned to the firing line, aware that every eye in the facility was now fixed on her, and prepared for the next demonstration in a series that would fundamentally alter how everyone present understood their profession and their prejudices. The 2,200-meter target existed at the edge of visual possibility. Even through high-powered optics, it appeared as little more than a dark suggestion against the desert floor, shimmering in the heat distortion that now dominated the range. The morning had progressed from perfect shooting conditions to challenging, and would only grow worse as the sun climbed higher. 3 shooters remained in competition besides Vera. All were experienced snipers with distinguished records. All looked shaken by what they had witnessed, their confidence eroded by performance that defied their understanding of human capability. Oleander was among them, but his earlier swagger had vanished completely, replaced by grim determination mixed with visible confusion. The first shooter, a Marine gunnery sergeant on temporary assignment to the facility, approached the line with professional composure. His spotter fed him data continuously, adjusting for the increasingly chaotic wind conditions. He fired 5 shots over the course of 6 minutes, taking time between attempts to let conditions stabilize. 1 hit for misses. Respectable performance under difficult circumstances, and he accepted the result with stoic grace. The second shooter, an Army sniper instructor named Chun who had been silent throughout the morning, managed 2 hits from 5 attempts. She shot with mechanical precision, her technique flawless, but the distance and conditions overwhelmed even excellent fundamentals. Still, 2 hits at 2,200 meters placed her among the facility's elite performers on any normal day. Oleander was third. He settled behind his custom rifle with visible tension, his movements lacking their usual fluid confidence. This was no longer about records or reputation. This had become about salvaging something from a morning that had demolished his understanding of his own expertise. His spotter, equally shaken, provided data with unusual uncertainty, second-guessing calculations that had always seemed reliable before. Oleander's first 3 shots missed entirely. He paused, breathing deeply, visibly forcing composure. His 4th shot connected, striking near the target edge. His 5th missed again. 1 for 5. He rose from position without his customary comments or gestures, his face expressing something between devastation and disbelief. He had shot worse today than on any range session in recent memory, and everyone understood why. The psychological pressure of competing against the impossible had destroyed his concentration. Torres looked at his clipboard, then at Vera, his expression suggesting he no longer trusted his own procedures. Captain Koskinen, he called, his voice carrying unusual formality. Final shooter at 2,200 meters. The words felt inadequate to the moment, but protocol demanded their utterance. Vera moved to the firing line for the 4th time that morning. The crowd had swelled considerably as word spread throughout the facility. Personnel from other ranges, administrative staff, even kitchen workers had gathered to witness what was rapidly becoming facility legend. The visiting captain who was shooting like a phenomenon beyond human capability. She settled behind the rifle, feeling the accumulated heat in its metal components. The weapon was standard issue, now thoroughly proven to be capable of extreme performance in the right hands, which meant every missed shot from every other competitor could no longer be attributed to equipment limitations. The implications of that reality were still rippling through the crowd's consciousness. Wind conditions had deteriorated significantly. Gusts were reaching 15 miles per hour, creating unpredictable horizontal and vertical instabilities. Heat shimmer distorted visual acquisition. The target was essentially invisible without magnification, and barely visible even with it. These were conditions that most expert shooters would consider prohibitive for extreme distance work. Vera processed the variables with practiced automaticity. Years of experience in far worse conditions had calibrated her instincts to a level that transcended conscious calculation. She understood wind not as data points, but as living force, readable through subtle cues that others could not perceive. Temperature inversions, pressure differentials, terrain effects on air movement, all of it integrated into her decision-making without apparent effort. Her first shot struck center mass. Clean, undeniable, perfect. The second shot followed within seconds, hitting so close to the first that the target sensors struggled to register them as separate impacts. The third, fourth, and fifth shots continued the pattern. 5 for 5 at 2,200 meters in deteriorating conditions. Shooting faster than conventional wisdom suggested was possible, achieving accuracy that exceeded the theoretical capabilities of both weapon and ammunition. The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. The gathered personnel stood frozen, confronting evidence that invalidated core assumptions about their profession. This was not luck. This was not favorable conditions. This was mastery at a level that existed in theoretical discussions, but was never supposed to manifest in reality. Brennan had moved to the front of the observation area, standing beside the headquarters colonel. Both men wore expressions of intense focus, and Vera could imagine the conversation happening between them. Questions about her identity, her background, the security classifications that must surround someone with this capability. The colonel was almost certainly already accessing databases, running searches, trying to understand who and what had arrived at this facility under the guise of administrative observation. Richter stood apart from the crowd, his face pale. He was replaying the morning in his mind, remembering his patient instruction on fundamentals, his generous offer to teach her basics, his pride in her early successes that he had attributed to his teaching skill. The humiliation was existential. He had not taught her anything. She had been tolerating his instruction with the patience of a master, allowing a student to feel useful. Torres approached Vera slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever spell had descended on the range. "Captain," he said quietly. He paused, searching for words adequate to describe the impossible. "That was the most extraordinary shooting I have witnessed in 20 years of range operations." He glanced at his clipboard, then back at her. "We have one final distance, 2,400 meters. No one in facility history has successfully engaged that target." He hesitated. "Would you like to attempt it?" It was not really a question. Everyone present needed to see if her performance would hold at the absolute limit of the facility's capability. They needed to know if there was any boundary to her skill, any distance where she would finally demonstrate the same limitations that constrained everyone else. Vera considered briefly. 2,400 meters was not technically difficult for her. She had confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters in operational environments. But each additional demonstration amplified the disruption she was causing. At some point, revelation crossed from useful into destabilizing, from educational into destructive. But Brennan caught her eye, and she read his message clearly. "All the way, Captain. Show them everything." Only complete demonstration would catalyze complete change. Half measures would allow comfortable retreat into partial explanations and qualified acknowledgments. "I will attempt it," Vera said simply. Torres nodded, no longer surprised by anything. He turned to the gathered crowd. 2,400 meters, he announced. Final demonstration. His tone suggested he was narrating events for future records, documenting something that would be discussed and analyzed for years. The 2,400-meter target was a testament to ambition over practicality. It had been installed 3 years earlier when the facility commander had aspirations of training snipers for extreme distance work. But after hundreds of failed attempts by the facility's best shooters, it had become essentially ornamental, a target that existed more as a theoretical marker than actual training objective. Vera settled into position for the 5th time. Her body showed no signs of fatigue, despite the accumulated stress of repeated extreme distance shooting. Around her, the crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting the best possible view of what would happen next. The mathematics of 2,400 meters were prohibitive. Bullet drop exceeded 20 feet. Wind drift could push rounds 10 feet or more off course. Flight time approached 4 seconds, during which countless variables could affect trajectory. The amount of compensation required exceeded what most shooters could visualize, let alone calculate and execute. But Vera had long since transcended calculation. At this level of mastery, shooting became intuitive rather than mathematical, a dialogue between shooter and environment that bypassed conscious thought. She felt the wind, read the thermals, sensed the invisible forces that would affect her bullet's flight. Her mind integrated data faster than conscious processing allowed. She fired once. The bullet flew for nearly 4 seconds, a lifetime in shooting terms. The entire facility held its breath. Then the target's sensor registered impact. Center mass. Perfect hit at a distance where perfection was supposed to be impossible. Someone in the crowd made a sound halfway between gasp and laugh. The involuntary noise of someone whose reality had just broken. Vera fired 4 more times in quick succession, faster than anyone thought advisable at this distance. 5 seconds between shots, barely enough time for minimal recalculation. 5 for 5. Perfect score at 2,400 meters. The target display showed grouping that would have been impressive at 600 meters, let alone 4 times that distance. The sensors verified and re-verified, finding no errors, no malfunctions, only impossible accuracy achieved through means the observers could not comprehend. The facility's assumption about the limits of human marksmanship had just been shattered beyond any possibility of reconstruction. And now everyone present needed to understand who had shattered it and why. The silence extended for 10 seconds, then 20. No one seemed capable of speech, as if language itself had become inadequate to the moment. Vera rose from the firing position, her movements unhurried and economical. She safed the rifle, cleared the chamber, and set the weapon on the equipment table with the same professional precision she had maintained throughout. Torres was the first to recover partial function. He stared at his tablet, at the verified sensor data, at the impossible numbers that documented impossible performance. Captain Koskinen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That is, he stopped again, shaking his head. 25 for 25 across all distances. Perfect scores from 1,800 to 2,400 meters. That has never, in the history of this facility, in the history of any facility I am aware of. The headquarters colonel had his phone out, speaking urgently to someone while maintaining eye contact with Vera. His expression suggested he was receiving information that confirmed suspicions and raised new questions simultaneously. Beside him, Brennan wore a slight smile, the satisfaction of someone whose gamble had paid off beyond even his expectations. Richter approached slowly, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Ma'am," he said, and the use of the respectful term rather than her rank was telling. "I need to—" He paused, struggling with words. "Who are you? Where did you train? Those are not the skills of someone with some experience. Those are the skills of—" He stopped again, apparently unable to complete the thought. Oleander had moved closer as well, though he maintained careful distance, as if approaching something dangerous. His face was ashen, and Vera recognized the look. She had seen it before in the eyes of people confronting the gap between their perceived expertise and actual mastery. It was the expression of someone whose identity was built on being the best, suddenly learning they were not even close. "I think," Brennan said, his voice carrying across the range with commanding authority, "we need to move this conversation somewhere more private. Captain Koskinen, if you would join me in my office." He gestured toward Torres and the headquarters colonel. "You two as well. Master Sergeant Richter, Sergeant Oleander, you are invited if you wish to attend." The walk to the administration building felt surreal. Personnel they passed stopped and stared, word having spread impossibly fast about what had occurred on Range 7. Vera heard whispered conversations, fragments of speculation and disbelief. By evening, she knew, the story would have spread throughout the entire military community, growing with each retelling. Brennan's office felt cramped with 6 people inside. He gestured for Vera to take the chair facing his desk while the others arranged themselves around the room. The headquarters colonel remained standing near the door, his phone still active, apparently receiving continuous updates. Captain Koskinen, Brennan began, his tone formal. I believe explanations are necessary. The performance we just witnessed exceeds anything in facility records. It exceeds most documented shooting in military history. He leaned forward slightly. So I will ask directly. Who are you? What is your actual background? And why were you sent here under administrative cover? Vera had known this moment would arrive the instant she decided to participate in the trials. There was no walking back the demonstration, no plausible explanation that would preserve her anonymity. The only question was how much to reveal and in what manner. My name is Vera Koskinen, she said quietly. My rank is captain, currently assigned to Joint Special Operations Command Evaluation Division. My primary military occupational specialty is designated sniper, with secondary specialties in reconnaissance and counterterrorism operations. She paused, letting that information settle. I have been operational for 14 years, with deployments to 17 different theaters. I hold facility records at 3 different Allied nation training centers and unofficial records at distances exceeding 3,000 meters. The room absorbed this in stunned silence. Richter looked physically ill, clearly calculating every condescending word he had spoken to someone with credentials that dwarfed his own. Oleander stared at the floor, his earlier bravado now appearing as painful embarrassment rather than justified confidence. The headquarters colonel spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the accent of someone from the northeastern states. Captain Koskinen's file is classified at levels that required 2 separate authorizations for me to access. She operates under multiple cover identities for operational security. Her confirmed kill count is, he glanced at his phone, information I am not clear to share in this setting. But I can confirm that she is listed as one of the top 3 precision shooters currently serving in any NATO military force. Vera noted the careful phrasing. One of the top 3, when the actual classification was more specific but more dangerous to acknowledge publicly. The colonel was protecting information while confirming enough to establish credibility. Brennan nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. Your evaluation assignment was not actually about administrative procedures, was it, Captain? You were sent here because operational performance of our graduates has been inadequate, and command wanted to know why. That is correct, sir, Vera confirmed. Recent graduates from this facility have failed in field conditions at rates that do not correlate with their training scores. JSOC Command requested detailed assessment of training methodology and institutional culture. And you determined that hands-on participation was necessary, Brennan said. That observation alone would not reveal the core problems. Vera chose her words carefully. Sir, the technical instruction here is excellent. Master Sergeant Richter and his team teach mechanics, as well as any program I have observed. But technical skill is only one component of effective marksmanship. Psychological preparation, adaptive thinking, and cultural factors all influence operational performance. She glanced at Richter, her expression neutral. The issue is not what is being taught, but what is not being taught and why those gaps exist. Richter found his voice, though it emerged strained. Ma'am, if I may ask, why did you let me, his face reddened, why did you allow me to instruct you as if you were a beginner? Why not simply identify yourself and conduct your evaluation openly? Because, Vera replied gently, the problems I needed to assess only reveal themselves in authentic conditions. If everyone had known my background and credentials, behavior would have changed. I needed to observe normal operations, normal assumptions, normal cultural dynamics. She paused, and I needed to understand how this facility treats personnel who are underestimated based on appearance or assumption. Oleander spoke suddenly, his voice tight with emotion. You're saying I treated you with disrespect, that I was arrogant and dismissive. Vera met his eyes directly. Sergeant Oleander, you treated me exactly as this facility's culture has taught you to treat anyone who does not fit the expected profile of an elite marksman. Your behavior was consistent with institutional norms here, which is precisely the problem. You assumed that confidence and swagger indicated competence, and that quiet observation indicated incompetence. Those assumptions are operationally dangerous. The colonel cleared his throat. Captain Koskinen's report will include specific recommendations. Based on what I have witnessed today, I anticipate those recommendations will require significant cultural and procedural changes. He looked at Brennan. This facility has produced technically proficient shooters while simultaneously embedding assumptions that limit their adaptability and exclude potential talent. That dynamic must change. Brennan nodded, his expression thoughtful. I suspected we had cultural problems, but I did not fully understand their scope. He looked at Vera with something approaching respect. Your demonstration today was not just about showing your skill, was it, Captain? It was about destroying comfortable certainties, forcing everyone here to confront their own limitations and prejudices. That was one objective, sir, Vera confirmed. Another was demonstrating that excellence can exist outside recognition, that competence cannot be assessed by appearance or demeanor or gender. The facility's best shooters assumed I was incompetent based on nothing more than the fact that I was a woman carrying a clipboard. That assumption is costly in training and potentially lethal in operations. Richter was shaking his head slowly, processing implications. Every student I have taught, every lesson I have delivered, I have been reinforcing these same assumptions, teaching them that they can judge capability by surface characteristics rather than demonstrated performance. He looked directly at Vera. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. For my condescension, my assumptions, my failure to see what was in front of me. Vera's expression softened slightly. Master Sergeant, you are an excellent technical instructor. Your students learn proper mechanics and achieve strong baseline competency. That is not nothing. But teaching must evolve beyond mechanics to include adaptability, humility, and recognition that expertise takes many forms. She paused. The best shooter in any room might be the quietest person present. That lesson needs to be embedded in your curriculum. Torres, who had been silent throughout the conversation, spoke up. The entire facility will know about this within hours, sir. He looked at Brennan. Every assumption about who can shoot and how capability is determined has just been obliterated. That will have consequences throughout our training programs. Good, Brennan said firmly. Consequences are exactly what we need. Comfortable certainty was killing our operational effectiveness. Disruption is painful but necessary. He turned to Vera. Captain, I assume your evaluation will continue for the remainder of the week? Yes, sir, Vera replied. I need to observe how the facility processes today's demonstration, how instruction adapts or fails to adapt, how cultural assumptions either persist or evolve. The real assessment begins now, watching how people respond to having their worldview challenged. The headquarters colonel was typing rapidly on his phone. I am documenting this for command, he said. This may become a case study for institutional change across multiple training facilities. What happened today exposed problems that extend far beyond Fort Bridger. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, covering procedural details and assessment timelines. But the essential revelation had occurred. The visiting administrative captain had been exposed as one of the military's most lethal precision shooters, and everyone present was now forced to recalibrate their understanding of expertise, gender, and the dangerous comfort of assumption. Word spread through Fort Bridger with the speed of wildfire through dry brush. By noon, every person on the facility knew that the quiet administrative captain had destroyed facility records and revealed herself as one of the military's most elite snipers. The story grew with each retelling, details embellished, but the core truth remaining undeniable. They had all dismissed someone whose capabilities exceeded their collective understanding. Vera spent the afternoon in the observation tower, watching how training operations absorbed the revelation. Some instructors continued their sessions as if nothing had changed, clinging to familiar routines as anchors against uncertainty. Others had modified their teaching, suddenly self-conscious about assumptions they had never questioned before. The facility's confidence, so absolute that morning, had fractured into uncertainty and recalibration. Richter appeared in the observation tower shortly after 1400 hours. He looked exhausted, as if the morning's events had aged him years. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "may I speak with you?" His formality was different now. No longer the patient tolerance of an expert dealing with an amateur, but genuine respect mixed with visible discomfort. "Of course, Master Sergeant," Vera replied, gesturing to the chair beside her. Richter sat heavily, his eyes fixed on the ranges below. "I have been teaching here for 8 years," he said slowly. "Trained hundreds of students. Developed curriculum that has been adopted by 3 other facilities. I believed I understood marksmanship at the highest levels." He paused, his jaw working. "This morning taught me that I understood mechanics, but missed wisdom. That I taught technique, but not philosophy." Vera listened without interrupting, recognizing that he needed to process aloud. "Every student I dismissed as lacking potential, every assumption I made about who could become an elite shooter, every time I judged capability by appearance or confidence rather than demonstrated skill," Richter continued, "I was limiting not just individual potential, but the entire program's effectiveness." He turned to look at her directly. "How many talented shooters have I failed to recognize because they did not fit my preconceived image of what elite looked like?" "That is the right question," Vera said quietly, "and one that extends beyond this facility. Military culture has historically valued certain characteristics over others, often for reasons that have nothing to do with operational effectiveness. Confidence over competence, aggression over precision, visible strength over hidden capability." Richter nodded slowly. "Sergeant Oleander is currently in the commander's office, requesting transfer to another facility. He says he cannot remain somewhere that his reputation has been destroyed." The older instructor shook his head. "But his reputation was not destroyed by your performance, Captain. It was revealed as built on a narrow foundation. He was an excellent shooter within specific parameters, but he never developed the adaptability or humility necessary for genuine mastery." "How do you think he should proceed?" Vera asked, making it a question rather than judgment. Richter considered this carefully. "If he were my student, I would tell him that this moment offers an opportunity, that having your limitations exposed is painful but necessary for growth. That true expertise requires not just skill, but recognition of how much you do not know." He smiled slightly, without humor, "which is advice I apparently need to take myself." The observation tower door opened again, and Torres entered carrying a folder. "Captain, Master Sergeant," he said, nodding to both, "I have been reviewing historical facility records." He opened the folder, revealing printed data sheets. "In the past 5 years, we have had 12 female personnel attend training here. Administrative staff, logistics officers, a few attempting sniper qualification courses." He paused. Not one was taken seriously as a potential precision shooter. Several were actively discouraged from pursuing advanced training. Vera was not surprised, but hearing it documented was still significant. "What happened to those 12, Captain Torres?" 2 completed basic courses, but were never advanced to specialized training. 3 withdrew after experiencing what their reports describe as hostile training environment. 7 never attempted qualification because, Torres quoted from the document, they were informed by instructors that women lacked the necessary physical and psychological attributes for precision shooting. He closed the folder. "We systematically excluded an entire demographic based on assumption rather than evidence." Richter's expression had grown even more troubled. "I was one of those instructors," he said quietly. "I believed I was being realistic, protecting people from pursuing careers where they would fail. But I was actually protecting my own assumptions from being challenged." The 3 of them sat in silence for a moment, watching training continue below. On range 4, a young specialist was struggling with windage calculations, his instructor patiently working through the mathematics. Good teaching, Vera observed, but limited by the framework within which it occurred. "Captain Koskinen," Torres said carefully, "your report will recommend significant changes. Cultural overhaul, revised assessment criteria, elimination of demographic assumptions." He met her eyes. those recommendations will face resistance. People who have built careers on current systems will fight to preserve them, consciously or unconsciously. I am aware, Vera replied. Change is always resisted, particularly when it requires people to acknowledge they were wrong. But operational necessity must override institutional comfort. We cannot afford to waste talent or perpetuate methods that produce inadequate results simply because change is difficult. The door opened a third time, and the headquarters colonel entered. He looked at the three of them, seeming to assess the conversation he was interrupting. Captain Koskinen, I have been in contact with JSOC Command. Your demonstration this morning has generated significant interest at the highest levels. They are requesting you conduct similar evaluations at 2 additional facilities, using the same methodology. Vera felt a familiar weight settle across her shoulders. More facilities, more demonstrations, more comfortable assumptions to dismantle. Necessary work, but exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with physical effort. Understood, sir. Timeline? The colonel consulted his phone. Your evaluation here will conclude as scheduled. You will have 1 week before the next assignment. He paused. Command is also requesting you develop training materials, a curriculum supplement focused on what they are calling adaptive marksmanship. Teaching shooters to think rather than just execute. That will require more than 1 week, Vera said. Comprehensive curriculum development is a months-long process. You will have support, the colonel assured her. A team of instructional designers and subject matter experts. Your role is to provide the operational expertise and philosophical framework. He smiled slightly. Apparently, someone at the Pentagon believes this morning's demonstration proved that our entire approach to marksmanship training needs fundamental revision. Not our entire approach, Vera corrected gently. The technical foundation is sound, but it needs to be integrated with psychological preparation, cultural awareness, and recognition that expertise takes many forms. We need to teach adaptive thinking, not just mechanical replication. Richter spoke up. Ma'am, if you are developing new curriculum, I would like to be involved. Not as an expert, but as a student. I need to unlearn assumptions before I can teach differently. His expression was earnest, almost pleading. Let me be part of the solution rather than remain part of the problem. Vera studied him carefully. The request was genuine, born from authentic recognition of his limitations. That kind of humility was rare and valuable. I will make the recommendation to command, Master Sergeant. Your technical expertise, combined with willingness to challenge your own assumptions, could be exactly what curriculum development needs. Torres cleared his throat. Captain, there's another matter. Several female personnel on this facility, administrative and support staff, have submitted requests to attempt shooter qualification courses. Apparently, your demonstration convinced them that opportunities exist beyond what they were told. He looked uncomfortable. We have no immediate framework for accommodating those requests. Our qualification pipeline is designed around specific assumptions about candidate background and preparation. Then the pipeline needs redesign, Vera said simply. If qualified personnel are requesting opportunities to serve in roles where they can contribute, institutional barriers should be examined and removed. Create assessment criteria based on demonstrated capability rather than demographic profiles. Aptitude testing, psychological evaluation, physical fitness standard applied equally regardless of gender or background. That represents significant policy change, Torres observed. Months of development, approval processes, potential resistance from traditional instructors. All of which is necessary, Vera replied. Change is not optional when current systems are operationally inadequate. The question is whether this facility will lead that change or resist it. She looked at each of them in turn. You have an opportunity here to transform not just training methods, but institutional culture. To create a model that other facilities will be directed to follow. That requires courage and sustained commitment, but the alternative is continued operational failure. The colonel was typing notes on his phone. I am documenting this conversation for command. Your recommendations carry significant weight after this morning's demonstration. He looked up at Vera. You understand that you have become, whether you intended it or not, a symbol. Proof that excellence exists beyond traditional recognition. Female service members across all branches will hear about what happened here, and many will see it as validation that opportunities should exist for them. Vera felt the weight of that expectation, familiar from years of operating in spaces that expected her to fail. Symbols are useful for motivation, but dangerous as expectations. I am one person with specific talents developed through specific circumstances. Not every female service member will become an elite sniper any more than every male service member does. The point is not that women can do everything men can do. The point is that capability should be assessed individually rather than categorically. Well said. Brennan's voice came from the doorway. He had entered unnoticed during the conversation, and precisely the message that needs to spread throughout our training culture. He moved into the room, his limp more pronounced than usual, suggesting pain from standing too long. I have spent the afternoon in meetings with facility leadership. Opinion is divided between those who see this morning as wake-up call and those who see it as aberration. He looked at Vera. Your continued presence here will help determine which perspective prevails. The afternoon sun had shifted angle, painting the ranges in golden light. Training continued below, shooters pursuing excellence within frameworks that were already beginning to shift, whether they recognized it yet or not. The demonstration on Range 7 that morning had been dramatic, but the real transformation would occur slowly, through hundreds of small changes in how people thought and taught and assessed capability. Vera understood that her role was catalyst, not solution. She had disrupted comfortable assumptions, but rebuilding would require sustained effort from many people over extended time. The question was whether institutions could overcome their resistance to change quickly enough to match operational necessity. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Vera arrived at Range 7 to find it already occupied by an impromptu gathering. 23 personnel, a mix of male and female soldiers from various specialties, had assembled without official authorization. They stood in loose formation, clearly uncertain about their purpose, but unified by something that transcended normal military hierarchy. A young specialist stepped forward as Vera approached, her posture rigid with nervous determination. "Ma'am," she said, her voice carrying across the morning air, "we request permission to address you." Her name, tape, read Castellanos, and Vera recognized her as one of the administrative clerks who processed facility paperwork. "Permission granted, Specialist," Vera replied, curious about what had motivated this gathering. Castellanos glanced back at the group, gathering courage from their presence. "Ma'am, yesterday you demonstrated that assumptions about capability are often wrong, that excellence can exist where no one expects it." She paused, choosing words carefully. "Many of us have been told, either explicitly or implicitly, that certain career paths are not available to us, that we lack necessary attributes for specialized roles. Your demonstration proved those assessments were based on prejudice rather than evidence." The group behind her murmured agreement, and Vera noted the mix of expressions: determination, hope, uncertainty, anger at opportunities denied. These were people who had internalized limitations imposed by others, now confronting the possibility that those limitations were artificial. "What are you requesting, Specialist?" Vera asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The opportunity to prove ourselves," Castellanos replied. "Not special treatment or lowered standards. Just fair assessment based on demonstrated capability rather than demographic assumptions. Several of us have requested qualification attempts for specialized programs. Marksmanship, reconnaissance, other technical specialties. Those requests have been denied or discouraged. We are asking for your support in having those decisions reconsidered." Vera surveyed the assembled group, seeing echoes of her own early career in their faces. The hunger to serve at full capacity, the frustration of artificial barriers, the isolation of being underestimated. She understood their position intimately, but also recognized the complexity of their request. "I cannot guarantee outcomes," Vera said clearly. Standards exist for legitimate reasons, and not everyone who attempts qualification will succeed. That is true regardless of gender or background. What I can support is fair assessment. Opportunity to attempt qualification based on individual capability rather than categorical exclusion. She paused, ensuring they understood. That means you will face the same challenges, the same failure rates, the same demanding standards as any other candidate. There are no shortcuts to genuine competence. We understand, ma'am, Castellanos said. We're not asking for easy paths. We are asking for paths to exist at all. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan had approached during the exchange, accompanied by Richter and 2 other senior instructors. He listened for a moment, then stepped forward. Specialist Castellanos, your request is noted. He glanced at Vera, then back at the group. Effective immediately, this facility will implement revised qualification procedures. Any personnel who meet baseline physical and psychological standards may attempt specialized training, regardless of previous military occupational specialty or demographic profile. He paused, his tone becoming stern. However, standards will not be lowered. Failure rates will likely be high. This is opportunity, not guarantee. The group reacted with visible relief and determination. Several exchanged glances, clearly processing the unexpected success of their impromptu appeal. Brennan continued speaking, his command voice carrying authority that demanded attention. Master Sergeant Richter will oversee development of new assessment protocols. These will focus on aptitude testing, baseline capability measurement, and structured training progressions. He looked directly at Richter. Your personal involvement in this reform will determine whether this facility leads cultural change or merely complies with directives from above. Choose your role carefully. Richter nodded, his expression serious. Understood, sir. I choose to lead. His gaze swept across the assembled group. Anyone who wishes to attempt qualification will receive fair assessment and honest instruction. I will not guarantee success, but I will guarantee opportunity. Vera felt something shift in the morning air, a subtle change in possibilities and trajectories. This was not the dramatic demonstration of yesterday, but perhaps it was more significant. Institutional change required not just spectacular revelations, but sustained commitment to different methods and values. The group began to disperse, conversations animated with hope and determination. Castellanos remained, approaching Vera with evident nervousness. Ma'am, she said quietly, may I ask you something personal? Go ahead, specialist. How did you persist, Castellanos asked, through all the dismissals and assumptions? How did you maintain confidence when everyone around you suggested you were inadequate? Vera considered the question carefully, weighing honesty against the risk of discouragement. I did not maintain confidence, she said finally. There were many moments of doubt. Many times I questioned whether the barriers were right and I was wrong. What sustained me was not confidence, but commitment. Commitment to become as skilled as I could possibly become, regardless of recognition or validation. She met the younger woman's eyes. Excellence pursued for its own sake is more sustainable than excellence pursued for approval. External validation is unreliable, but internal standards can be constant. Castellanos absorbed this thoughtfully. Did you ever want to quit? Frequently, Vera admitted. But I had a mentor who taught me that discomfort in service of growth is temporary, while regret from abandoning potential is permanent. Whenever I considered quitting, I asked myself whether I was stopping because I had reached my actual limits or because I was tired of fighting assumptions. The answer was always the latter, which meant I had not yet earned the right to quit. That makes sense, Castellanos said. She hesitated, then added, thank you, ma'am, for demonstrating what is possible, for not staying invisible. The comment struck deeper than the specialist probably intended. Vera had spent most of her career maintaining exactly that invisibility, operating in shadows and letting others claim credit for her work. Emerging from that anonymity came with costs she was still calculating. But perhaps, she reflected, there were moments when invisibility became complicity, when silence enabled systems that needed disruption. Brennan waited until Castellanos had departed, then approached Vera with Torres beside him. "Captain," Torres said, "we have preliminary data on qualification requests. 47 personnel have submitted applications, nearly triple our normal quarterly intake. Demographics are significantly more diverse than historical patterns." He consulted his tablet. "If even 20% successfully complete training, we will fundamentally change this facility's operational culture. That assumes training adapts to accommodate different learning styles and backgrounds," Vera observed. "Traditional methods may not effectively develop talent that does not fit conventional profiles. You will need flexibility in curriculum while maintaining rigor in standards." Richter had joined them, his expression thoughtful. "Captain, I would like your input on something. One of the new applicants is Sergeant Oleander. He has requested to repeat qualification training from the beginning, essentially restarting his development with what he calls corrected assumptions and humility." He looked uncertain. "Part of me wants to deny the request, sees it as attention-seeking or inadequate understanding of what he did wrong. But another part thinks genuine recognition of limitations deserves opportunity for growth." Vera thought about Oleander's arrogance the previous day, his visible devastation when his skills proved inadequate compared to hers. The man's ego had been crushed, his reputation destroyed. But perhaps destruction was necessary precursor to reconstruction. "What does your intuition tell you about his sincerity?" she asked Richter. The older instructor considered this carefully. "I believe he is sincere, humiliated and uncertain, but genuinely wanting to become better rather than just restore his reputation. Whether he can sustain that humility through the difficulty of retraining, I do not know. But denying him the opportunity feels like perpetuating the same categorical judgments we're trying to eliminate." "Then give him the opportunity," Vera said, with clear understanding that his previous status carries no weight, that he will be assessed exactly as any new candidate. If he succeeds, he becomes a powerful example of growth through humility. If he fails, that is also instructive. Either outcome serves the larger purpose better than exclusion." Brennan nodded agreement. "See to it, Master Sergeant." Oleander rejoins as a standard candidate with no special consideration. His previous achievements are acknowledged, but not relevant to his current assessment. The morning had warmed considerably, the sun climbing toward its zenith. Vera felt the weight of the past 2 days settling across her shoulders, the exhaustion that came not from physical exertion, but from emotional and psychological intensity. She had disrupted an entire facility's understanding of competence and capability. Now the real work began, the sustained effort to transform disruption into lasting change. "Captain Koskinen," Brennan said, "you mentioned yesterday that true expertise requires not just skill, but recognition of how much you do not know." He smiled slightly. "This morning taught me that leadership requires the same quality. Recognizing that our certainty often masks ignorance, that our traditions sometimes preserve dysfunction rather than excellence. That recognition is the beginning of wisdom, sir," Vera replied. "The difficult part is maintaining it when comfortable certainty offers easier alternatives." They stood together watching the ranges, where training continued with subtle differences that hinted at larger transformations ahead. The facility that had been so certain of its methods 2 days ago was now questioning everything, rebuilding foundations while trying to maintain operational function. Messy, difficult, necessary work that would determine whether spectacle translated into substance. Vera's phone buzzed with a message from JSOC Command. New assignment details, timelines for additional facility evaluations, curriculum development requirements. The work was expanding, the disruption she had catalyzed spreading to other installations. She felt simultaneously energized and exhausted by the prospect. But for now, in this moment, standing on a range where assumptions had shattered and possibilities had opened, she allowed herself to feel something approaching satisfaction. Not pride, exactly, but recognition that sometimes the hardest thing to do was also the most necessary. That visibility, despite its costs, could serve purposes beyond personal comfort. The specialist, named Castellanos, was on the distant range, being fitted for equipment by an instructor who was actually listening to her questions rather than dismissing them. Small moment, easily overlooked, but containing multitudes of potential change. That was how transformation actually occurred, Vera understood. Not through dramatic demonstrations alone, but through thousands of small interactions where assumptions were challenged and different possibilities emerged. The week concluded with an unexpected ceremony. Brennan had assembled the entire facility in a main briefing hall, standing room only, with personnel spilling into adjoining corridors. Vera had not been informed about the gathering's purpose, told only that her presence was required at 1400 hours. She entered to find hundreds of faces turned toward her, expressions ranging from respect to curiosity to lingering discomfort. The transformation of the past 5 days was visible in subtle ways. Female personnel stood interspersed throughout the formation rather than clustered at the margins. The usual segregation between elite shooters and support staff had softened, replaced by something approaching unified community. Brennan stood at the podium, his command presence filling the room despite his injuries. When Captain Koskinen arrived at this facility 1 week ago, he began without preamble. She came under administrative cover to conduct what we believed was routine evaluation. What we did not know was that we were hosting one of the most accomplished precision shooters in modern military history. He paused, letting that information settle across personnel who had not yet heard the full story. More importantly, we did not know that our own assumptions and cultural limitations were about to be comprehensively exposed. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Vera stood near the side entrance, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding the necessity of this moment. 5 days ago, Brennan continued, this facility believed it understood excellence. We had clear definitions of what elite marksmanship looked like, confident assessments of who possessed necessary attributes, established hierarchies based on demonstrated performance within our narrow parameters. He let the criticism hang in the air. Then Captain Koskinen participated in our extended range trials and achieved perfect scores across every distance from 1,800 to 2,400 meters. She destroyed facility records that we believed were essentially unbreakable. She demonstrated capabilities that exceeded our collective understanding of what was humanly possible. The room had fallen completely silent, everyone focused on Brennan's words. But the demonstration was not about showing us her skill, Brennan said quietly. It was about revealing our blindness. Captain Koskinen allowed instructors to teach her basics she had mastered 15 years ago. She tolerated condescension and dismissal from personnel whose expertise was fractional compared to hers. She remained silent while we made fools of ourselves with our assumptions and arrogance. He paused, his expression severe. Why? Because she needed us to reveal ourselves authentically, without the performance adjustments that would have occurred if we had known her credentials. Vera saw Richter in the audience, his face reflecting recognition of his own role in that revelation. Oleander stood nearby, his earlier swagger completely absent, replaced by attentive humility. What Captain Koskinen's evaluation revealed is uncomfortable but necessary truth, Brennan continued. This facility has been systematically excluding talent based on demographic assumptions rather than demonstrated capability. We have taught students to conflate confidence with competence, to judge capability by appearance rather than performance. We have created a culture where certain voices are amplified while others are dismissed, where opportunities are distributed based on expectations rather than potential. The discomfort in the room was palpable, but Brennan did not soften his message. Those practices end today, he said firmly. Effective immediately, this facility implements comprehensive reforms to assessment, training, and cultural standards. All qualification attempts will be evaluated based on individual demonstrated capability. All instruction will focus on adaptive thinking rather than mechanical replication. All personnel will be held accountable for assumptions that limit operational effectiveness. He looked directly at Vera. Captain Koskinen's report to Joint Special Operations Command includes 43 specific recommendations. We will implement every single one. Brennan gestured, and Torres approached carrying a wooden case. The lieutenant colonel opened it to reveal a commendation medal and accompanying certificate. Captain Vera Koskinen, he read from the citation, for exceptional service in exposing institutional weaknesses and catalyzing necessary reform. Your demonstration of elite marksmanship capabilities and your patient documentation of cultural dysfunction have enabled transformation that will improve operational readiness across multiple training facilities. Your commitment to excellence and institutional integrity exemplifies the highest standards of military service. The room erupted in applause, genuine and sustained. Vera accepted the commendation with professional grace, though she felt ambivalent about recognition for work that had required deception and disruption. Medals felt inadequate to the complexity of what had occurred. Brennan was not finished. "I want to share one additional piece of information," he said after the applause subsided. Captain Koskinen's classified file includes a designation that fewer than 20 active duty personnel carry. She is certified as what Special Operations Community calls a Tier 1 precision shooter. That designation requires confirmed performance at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters in operational environments, documented mission success rates above 98%, and peer recognition as being among the absolute best in the world at this specialty. The room absorbed this in stunned silence. Even those who had witnessed her range performance were visibly shocked by the scope of her credentials. When Sergeant Oleander offered to teach her basic shooting, Brennan continued with deliberate emphasis. He was offering to teach someone whose skills place her in the top tier of global military capability. When Master Sergeant Richter suggested starting her at 300 meters, he was suggesting that to someone who holds unofficial records at 10 times that distance. His tone was not mocking, but instructive. This is what institutional blindness looks like. Good people, skilled professionals, making catastrophically wrong assessments because they saw what they expected rather than what existed. Richter stood, his movement drawing attention. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "with your permission, I would like to address the facility." Brennan nodded, and Richter moved to the front, facing his peers and students. "I have been an instructor here for 8 years," Richter began. "I believed I understood my profession at the highest levels. I believe my assessments of student potential were accurate and fair. I was wrong." He paused, clearly struggling with public admission. "I dismissed Captain Koskinen based on nothing more than gender and apparent inexperience. I offered to teach her things she could teach me. I took credit for her performance when she politely allowed me to maintain my illusions." His expression was pained but resolute. That failure of judgment reflects systemic problems in how we assess capability and distribute opportunity. I commit today to being part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. I will examine my assumptions, revise my methods, and hold myself accountable for creating a culture where excellence is recognized regardless of who demonstrates it. The applause that followed Richter's statement was different from before, more personal and supportive. His public accountability had given others permission to acknowledge their own blind spots. Brennan returned to the podium. "Over the coming months, every person in this facility will participate in revised training that emphasizes adaptive thinking, cultural awareness, and recognition that expertise takes many forms. We will actively recruit diverse talent pools and assess candidates based on demonstrated capability rather than demographic profiles. We will measure our success not by graduation rates, but by operational performance of our graduates in actual combat conditions." He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. "This transformation will be difficult. It requires acknowledging we were wrong, changing comfortable habits, and accepting that some of our previous certainties were illusions. But operational necessity demands nothing less." The ceremony continued with procedural announcements and administrative details, but the essential message had been delivered. Fort Bridger was committing to fundamental change, using Vera's demonstration as catalyst for transformation that would ripple throughout military training culture. Afterward, as personnel dispersed, Vera found herself approached by dozens of individuals. Some thanked her for revealing possibilities they had not believed existed. Others apologized for assumptions they had made. A few asked technical questions about shooting, genuinely curious now rather than dismissive. She responded to each with patient professionalism, recognizing that these small interactions were as important as the dramatic range demonstration. Specialist Castellanos appeared near the end, accompanied by 3 other female soldiers. "Ma'am," she said, "we begin qualification training next week. Master Sergeant Richter will be our primary instructor." She smiled nervously. "We understand most of us will probably fail. The standards are extremely high, and we lack the background of typical candidates. But we appreciate the opportunity to try, to be assessed fairly rather than categorically excluded. Standards should be high," Vera replied. "This work demands excellence, and not everyone will achieve it. But fair assessment means you succeed or fail based on your individual capability, not predetermined assumptions about what you can accomplish. That is all anyone can reasonably request." After the young soldiers departed, Brennan approached with Torres and the headquarters colonel. "Your transport to the next assignment departs at 0600 tomorrow," the colonel said. "Different facility, similar cultural problems. Command wants you to conduct the same methodology. Go in under administrative cover, document authentic dynamics, then demonstrate capabilities that force institutional reckoning." "How many facilities?" Vera asked, already suspecting the answer. The colonel consulted his tablet. "Current list includes 6 more, with potential expansion depending on results." He looked up. "You have become the instrument of institutional reform, Captain. Uncomfortable role, I imagine, but necessary one." Vera nodded slowly, processing the implications. Months of similar demonstrations, repeatedly shattering assumptions and forcing change. Exhausting work, emotionally and psychologically draining, but undeniably important. Lives depend on effective training. Operational success requires cultural evolution. Personal comfort seemed insignificant weighed against those stakes. She looked out across the ranges one final time, watching personnel conduct training under revised protocols. Small changes, barely visible to casual observation, but containing seeds of transformation. Instructors listening more carefully to questions. Students from diverse backgrounds receiving genuine consideration. Excellence being assessed by evidence rather than expectation. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you have ever witnessed someone reveal unexpected expertise that left everyone speechless. Share your thoughts about moments when assumptions were shattered and possibilities expanded. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. Vera felt the weight of the coming months, the continued disruption she would catalyze, the resistance she would encounter. But she also felt something approaching purpose. Not comfort, exactly, but recognition that some work, despite its difficulty, aligned with values deeper than personal preference. Tomorrow she would board a transport to another facility, assume another cover identity, begin another evaluation. More assumptions to expose, more cultural dysfunction to document, more demonstrations that would leave observers questioning everything they believed they knew about expertise and capability. But tonight, standing on a range where transformation had begun, where 47 personnel had requested opportunities previously denied, where instructors had committed to examining their own blindness, she allowed herself to feel that disruption, despite its costs, sometimes served purposes beyond comfort. The quiet professional who had spent years operating in shadows had stepped into light, and the illumination, harsh and uncomfortable as it was, revealed truths that needed witnessing. Excellence existed beyond recognition. Competence transcended assumption, and sometimes the most necessary demonstrations were those that destroyed comfortable certainty to make space for difficult growth. The wind carried desert dust across empty ranges, and Vera turned toward her quarters, already mentally preparing for tomorrow's journey and the continued work of catalyzing change one shattered assumption at a time.